It's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. And you can also find in the description the link to my Etsy shop where you can buy this wonderful, wonderful book. Visitors, guests, and boarders. Throughout the years, I've had a lot of different people living up here in the houses on my property or sleeping in my barn. When we were living in the mission, I had several families at different times living in the house that I bought from my brother-in-law's brother, the old McMahon place. One family moved in there and stayed until they got their house built. Several others lived in it for a few months or maybe a year or so. We've had several people who stayed in the Click house too. Doug was one of them. While he was staying there, he was going to fix up that dirt-floored cabin up below the pond, the one I bought from the family who turned over my outhouse. He actually started working on that. If he had stayed here, I had intended to give that place to him, but he found a place that he could buy. You could always hear talk up here from someone or another about the types of people I took in to help. Usually they would refer to them as those hippie types, but not all of them were. Doug wasn't. It just worried them something awful that I would let some strange-looking people stay up at the Click house or in my barn. Most of them thought I would let someone stay who would hurt me in some way. My boys never thought much about the ones I took in, and I would just tell the others, I don't care how they look. If someone comes to me for help, they're going to get help. You can't tell what people are going to turn out to be by judging their outsides. Just look at what happened to Scott and some of the others. To me, it's just been like watching butterflies come out of their cocoons. Besides that, I always kind of figured that God had a lot to do with the people showing up here. I knew He loved them, and He had a plan for their lives, and I just reckoned that if He sent them here, then I was a part of His plan for them too. It didn't matter that the mission house burned down and wasn't there anymore. I was His mission house. His temple, like the Bible says we all are. When I was young, we called where the mission workers lived the dwelling house, and we thought it a pure wonderment, the work that God accomplished through that place. Years later, I discovered that God calls those who belong to Him His dwelling place, and if we really let the Holy Spirit dwell in us and lead us, then it is indeed amazing what He can accomplish through us. When you just think about it, probably if we each did what He wanted us to do, when He wanted us to do it, really acted like we were His dwelling place, there would be much less need for missions and ministries. Scott came here from Newport during the time of hippies, and he was a sight for sure with his long dirty hair and mustache. Scott had heard from Granny Nichols about me taking in people. He and his wife thought they might rent one of my houses and stay around here for a while, but instead of one of my houses, they ended up sleeping in the barn when it was nothing but 2x4s and boards inside. I never did try to make anybody pay rent. I'd usually have them do chores for me, and if I did get rent money from them, I would save it up and give it to them as a surprise when they left. Rent or no rent, those who weren't willing to work didn't stay around here all that long. Scott changed a lot while he was here. He and his wife became Christians, and he later taught in a Christian school, and now he's a preacher. He just turned out real good and made a fine man. A lot of them turned out real good, like Jackie and Danny. They ended up going back to Florida. Jimmy was another one who became a preacher. Another one of the people I helped decided to stay around this area and has been so good to me since I've been sick. He brings me candy and things like that. At Christmas, he gave me some bedroom shoes and a house coat. The other day, he brought me some Twinkies, you know, those little packaged cakes. When I was in the hospital, they put me in a semi-private room. The private rooms cost $25 more a day, and besides that, they were all full. Well, don't you just know that as soon as one of those special private rooms became available, he had me moved into it. He paid for it and everything. He even gave me some money to help out with the doctor bills. See now, he was one who appreciated what I had done for him too. When the Indians, Bob and Donna, came to me for help, it was snowing and blowing so hard that I just couldn't tell them to leave. Donna's Indian name was Bear, and that's what everyone called her. Bob really wasn't an Indian, even though he considered himself one. He was actually more like a mountain man, and he made all his stuff from nature. He painted pictures, painted one on that saw up yonder on the wall, just like that, in no time at all. Bob and Bear had a pretty messed up life when they came up here. They had a young boy named Dakota, but they had never gotten married. Bear begged me to take her little son and raise him. "I can't take in your son. He's just a tiny young'un, and he needs his mama and daddy. I'll help you in every way I can, but you and Bob need to get your lives together, accept responsibility, and raise your own child." Little Dakota deserves at least that much. While they lived here, a lot of things changed in them, and they decided to get married. Bob actually made the dress that Bear wore the day of her wedding. A little while after they married, Bear's stepmother found them a little house on the reservation, so they went back to New Mexico. Her real mama had died when Bear was just a young'un. Then there was a boy named Sherby that stayed in the Click house for a while. He was another one of them with real long hair, but you couldn't tell it none because he wore his braided up around his head. He was the son of a Presbyterian preacher in Richmond, Virginia. His father and mother were real strict with him and must have been rather snooty because they would never let him play with any of the other children where he grew up. He always had to stay in the house and study and things like that. I reckon he had just gotten fed up with it, 'cause he told me that after his daddy died, he decided to leave home and just took off walking down the road one day. He met up with a bunch of these hippie types. He called them rainbows, and they took him to Michigan. In Michigan, he met Shirley, one of the rainbow people from up there. Shirley's friend Charity and her two little children had heard about me and planned to come down here to live for a while. She told Shirley and Sherby that she would bring them down with her and that they could all get a house and live together. That would give her someone to help drive and watch her kids on the way down here. They got down here early one evening in October. Sherby cleaned out the Click house so they could move in what little stuff they had. I said something to him about my apple tree needed pruning. Well, I told my mother I'd be back for Christmas. I have from now until then to help you with whatever you want done. I said that would be fine. Shirley went into the house like she was going to stay, you know, but she was acting rather strange. She'd pace around, go to the window, and look out, just staring at nothing in particular, and then she'd pace some more. Directly, Charity said to Shirley, "Me and the kids need to go over there to town before dark and get some things. You want to go with us?" Shirley went with her, and they didn't come back. Sherby stayed on by himself in the Click house for a while. One night he decided he was going to leave, and he started off over the mountain towards Bridgeport. I'm not sure where he had planned to go, but my dog Stevie just kept following him and wouldn't let him leave. Sherby tried just everything to make him go back home, but nothing worked. It was late when they finally got over to Bridgeport, so they took cover and slept in somebody's woodshed. That dog stayed right there with him all night long, so the next morning he had no choice but to bring Stevie back. We talked about his leaving, and I told him that if he went across to Del Rio instead of going to Bridgeport, he would come out nearer to the highway where he could get a ride. Guess it wasn't God's time for him to leave these parts just yet, because on the way down to Del Rio, he ran into Alden. They talked, and Alden asked him if he would stay with him for a while and help him with something or other. Don't know exactly what it was. After he moved in with Alden and got settled, he came up here to spend the night with me a few times. One time, he brought me a set of new sheets and pillowcases. "You look kind of puny," he said when he saw me. "How about I help you out with your chores and things for a while?" He didn't know I was sick, and I didn't know that I would end up in the hospital that very day. When I was in the hospital, he sent me a box of candy and did other special things like that. He had a good heart, commitment, and dreams. When I was young and just starting school, I knew about God. I knew that he was special and that he loved me, but I didn't think a lot about him, except maybe when I went to church or when the mission workers talked about him. The most important thing to me at that time was my family, sitting down by my mama's knees or sitting in Papa's lap. I guess I never thought about God taking care of me or watching out for me. That's what my parents had always done, and I just didn't think about God that way. It never occurred to me that he had a plan for my life. As I grew older, he became everything to me. I learned to respect God and depend on him. I learned that he would give my life a purpose to live for and would help me if I did my part. I guess in a way I had always wanted to know God, but it wasn't until I stayed with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Robinson and the other mission workers that I really and truly came to know him as my Savior and Lord. That's when he became my all, and I realized that I was even more important to him than I was to Mama and Papa. I'd always been taught by Mama and Papa that commitments and promises are very important and are meant to be kept. It didn't make any difference if you made them thoughtlessly or even as a joke. If you made a promise, you kept your word. That's all there was to it. There were times when I made promises without thinking much about it, without thinking things through. But even after I made a promise like that, I took it seriously whether I meant it or not. I don't guess I would have ever married Ben if I hadn't promised him that I would, but I'm glad I did. Life was not easy after he came back from the war. He did some things that really hurt me, and at times I felt so alone. But I wouldn't give anything for my children and grandchildren. If I hadn't married Ben, I wouldn't have them, and Ben wouldn't have had someone to take care of him all those years. When I made the commitment and promised God that I would come back here and teach and be the mission to my community, that's all there was to it. For a while, that was a difficult promise to keep. I wanted something else for my life, but I couldn't have it and keep my promise. Plus, I didn't know of anyone else who would do the work of the mission. I didn't know of anyone who was that interested or that committed to help the people up here like the mission workers had been. So I guess that was another one of the reasons I was so determined to come back. But being determined didn't make it any easier. My thoughts spent a good bit of time battling around in my head. That's when I'd remember what my parents had taught me, and I could almost hear Papa saying, "If you said you were going to do something, you better be a-doing it." The mission people believe that way too. Before you make a promise, be sure you have the commitment to carry it out. My papa was like that. If he made anybody a promise about anything, that was it. He was for sure going to carry it out. If my parents said something, they always did it, and we could always count on it. If they told us we couldn't go somewhere, it didn't do us any good to go back and keep whining and begging. We learned early on that acting like that only made things worse. Sometimes we would ask Mama, "Can we go up to Aunt Susie's?" or "Can we go to see Aunt Bess?" They were both old people in the community. "Ask your Papa," she'd always say. If we hadn't done our chores, he would tell us what we had left undone, and we knew that we could forget about that little visit we had planned. It wasn't going to happen, even when we finished our work. We knew we weren't even supposed to ask to do something if we didn't have our chores done. We never had to wonder about what was right and what was wrong, or what was important to our parents. Oh, for sure, we tested them a few times, but it didn't take us too long to figure out that what they said was what they meant, and our responsibilities, like work and study, came before playtime and adventure. I remember one time we were scared stiff. Mama and Papa had let us go to Uncle Doc Turner's to spend the afternoon, but we were supposed to be back by 5 o'clock. After we had been there for a while, Maggie, Burl, Ben, and Ethel decided they wanted to go visit someone in West Myers on the river. We knew we weren't supposed to do that, go someplace without Mama and Papa knowing. We went to the Turners. We never had to think about the time because the Turners would tell us when it was time to go home. But trollopsing around the mountains and down by the river, we had no idea what time it was getting to be. I doubt that we even thought about the time until it was too late. There were only a few people who lived there around the West Myers train stop. There wasn't much more than a house or two. At one time, they had a school over there with preaching services in it, but it didn't last long. Later, around the time of World War II, there were bauxite mines there. The bauxite was used in manufacturing of aluminum. Well, we stayed there for a while and then started heading back. When we rounded to the pond, we decided to go into this big old house that was supposed to be haunted. We had no idea what time it was, but we did know that Mama hadn't given us permission to be there. Of course, we were late getting home, and we had to admit to being where we weren't supposed to be. That was the last time we went to West Myers, and it was some time before we could go back to the Turners. Mission to be rebuilt. If I could do one more thing in my life, one more project, I would rebuild the mission. I would still like to have my life make a difference to somebody else, some other child. I'd always dreamed of the mission being restored. Maybe it wouldn't be like the mission had once been, but it would be used to help underprivileged or troubled children and families. I felt this so strongly that I considered it a calling from God. In the early 1970s, I thought that my dream for sure was going to come true. Reverend Willis Clauser of the Ambassadors for Christ from somewhere around Hershey, Pennsylvania, read the book Christy and decided to come here to see where the mission had been. Reverend and Mrs. Clauser were somewhat familiar with places around here since they had been working with an orphanage over in the Rogersville area for the past 18 years. I was still living outside the community, but somehow Reverend Clauser tracked me down and told me of his desire to rebuild the mission. In November of 1971, we made arrangements to take a trip into the cove. Along with Reverend and Mrs. Clauser were 4 people from New Jersey and Frida Bretschneider, a feature writer with the Newport Plain Talk. At that time, there was no way to get a car up to where the mission's foundation still stood. It was invaded by weeds and tall grasses so that you could not tell where the road once was. Even if we could have seen the road, it would have been unusable, nothing more than deep ruts. We rode in the Clauser's truck as far as we could go, and then we walked in the rest of the way. I showed Reverend Clauser and the others the foundation of where the mission had been. Then we walked farther into the cove, up to my house, there at the old McMahon place. He thought the hill out across from my house would be the perfect place to build the mission. You can rebuild the mission on my land and use my land for that purpose as long as you want to, under 2 conditions. The first is that when the land is no longer used for that purpose, it will revert back to the Myers heirs. The second is that there is to be no talk of denominations or politics. This mission is not going to have anything to do with either one. I want you to get that right now. He agreed to my conditions, and we decided to call the new mission Christy Land. A little later, we talked about calling it the New Ebenezer Mission in Christy Land. Nothing seemed to happen for some time. We finally did begin to build, but things didn't go well, and we were never able to rebuild the mission. It only ended in arguments, fights, and bad feelings. It was all very disappointing. So we'll stop right there for today. I wish Opal could have built it back, and the gentleman there. Don't you wish that had worked out? That would have been wonderful because Opal felt like it was a calling to God to be wonderful for her, but also just wonderful for everyone. I'm thinking about how many people it would have helped. Interesting how this one started out, though. Opal is the mission, really. She felt like that was God's calling on her life, but I think that she was the mission. I think she says that, and she talks about how the Bible talks about the dwelling house, and but I think that's how God worked through her, that she ended up being the mission herself, and letting all those people stay with her that she didn't know, and she trusted them. And how wonderful that she said, she didn't care what they looked like. All she cared was if they needed help, and she was going to help them. And then she told those wonderful stories of the people that she did help, and they helped her in turn. But, she compared it to a butterfly coming out of a cocoon. Wasn't that just beautiful? Wasn't that beautiful? And amazing. I mean, how word got out. Like the people in Michigan was like, we heard about her and we think we'll go down there. It's amazing, amazing. I do like how she used the dwelling house and how she talked about that. I liked it too because Pap said that he called houses like dwelling house. Like he'd say down there at the dwelling house, or they had a dwelling house. Instead of like today, of course, I would just say house. She lived in a little red house down there. He would say she lived in a little red dwelling house down there, or that little dwelling house at the end of the road or something. So I loved that. And then I loved Opal used wonderment. Don't you love that word? We should try to bring that back, wonderment. So many things in life are a true wonderment, and especially as a believer, I'm like Opal. When I think about how God works, that is a true wonderment. I loved in that same part when she's kind of talking about her faith and how important it is to her, and how she kind of always believed in God, but it was only through the mission, through the Mrs. Henderson, Miss Robinson, and I would say Miss Martson too, but through all them, that she truly come to have a close personal relationship with the Lord. And how she kind of talks about that and how he become her all. It's just beautiful, inspirational for somebody like me who is a believer to see her faith in that. I love, though, she said if we would all just do what God needs us to do, when he needs us to do it, there wouldn't be any need for missions and ministries, if we helped one another like we're supposed to. That's a beautiful thought. This part of the book mentioned Granny Nichols. So if you remember, I don't remember if it was last reading, one of the last 2 or 3 readings, she talked about how that the Etta was the midwife, and then she had to take in her mother-in-law and her mother and take care of them, but she had a little birthing room in her house, and Opal had told her, I'll go and I'll come if I can. If I'm not teaching, I'll come stay and take care of them while you deliver babies, if that, if that would help you out. And I'm sure that it did. Anyway, and I told you in that part, there's a book about Granny Nichols. So I've read it before, and if you look for it, you can find it. I'll put the name of it in the description below in case you want to. It's an interesting book, and she's an amazing woman too, and neat that her and Opal crossed paths, that they knew each other, they were part of each other's circle there. But as a midwife, a lot of it is just, and she delivered this baby, and she delivered this baby. I mean, she tells who the people were that come and all that. But it is amazing to me how many of those babies weighed 8, 9, 10, 11 pounds. They were the biggest babies in that area that I've ever heard of. So that was really amazing. But neat that she mentions her again, and that Granny Nichols had sent those 2 up there and said, maybe you can stay there. And how precious, Opal says, I never took any rent money for most of them. They just helped with the chores. But if I did take any rent money, I just saved it up, and then when they left, I give it back to them. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that just, talk about generosity? And then in that part of it too, when she's talking about the different people that stayed there, like the Bob and Bear, and Bob made Bear's wedding dress. Wouldn't you have loved to have seen that? But she, that's really Opal's influence. That's why I said I think Opal was the mission. I think she was the mission, and no, it never got rebuilt, but I think it was built in her, if that makes sense. Like she became the mission. to that area for sure. We've been reading all this time about all the people she helped, all the families, all the children. But then now these people are just wandering in from everywhere, and she's helping them in the same way. Really, really inspiring. And then, at the end, it is kind of sad that she wanted to start the mission. That was, if she had one thing left, that's what she would do. But again, I think the mission was Opal. I think she just become the mission, and because she followed, as a believer, I think it's because she followed the Lord and she done what the Lord wanted her to do, and she had a strong faith, that's for sure. So I hope you enjoyed today's part of the book. Sadly, we've got one more reading, so next week will be the very last one. So I do hope that you drop back by next Friday so you can hear the last of the book, and I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what you liked about today too.